You wake up with a weight in your chest, not heavy like grief, not sharp like fear, but something dull, constant, like a whisper that never stops. Still, you smile, you brush your teeth, you scroll, you show up. There's an art to pretending everything's fine, and you've become a master. Your smile isn't fake, it's practiced. It fits your face like a mask carved over years. And yet, behind that quiet smile, something is screaming. It's not dramatic. It doesn't want attention. It just wants to stop pretending. But how do you say, "I'm not okay," when the world has only ever loved the version of you that is? How do you fall apart when everyone needs you to hold it together, so you keep walking, smiling, performing? Because that's what strong people do, right? They carry it, they bury it, they learn to suffer beautifully. But maybe that's not strength. Maybe that's survival. Maybe your silence isn't peace. It's a quiet rebellion. And maybe that quiet scream inside of you isn't the sign of your failure. Maybe it's the proof that there's still something alive in you, something real, something honest, something sacred. Because only the soul that's been silenced for too long begins to scream. Not out of rage, but out of longing. Longing to be seen. Longing to be loved without conditions. Longing to exist without performance. And what if that longing is the doorway? What if the ache you've been trying to hide isn't your enemy, but the beginning of your return? What if all the pain you've dressed in silence was never meant to be buried, but understood? There's nothing wrong with you for breaking quietly. There's nothing weak about crying behind a smile. There's only truth, hidden behind the years of needing to be okay. And if you're still holding it in, still pretending, still afraid to be real, then maybe this is the beginning. Because what if the scream inside you is not asking for help, but inviting you home? They taught you how to smile, but no one ever taught you how to be seen. So you learned the quiet art of becoming what the world could love. Piece by piece, you edited yourself, softened your voice, shrunk your needs, laughed at the right moments, stayed silent at the wrong ones. You weren't lying, you were surviving. Because in a world that punishes the raw and rewards the agreeable, being real felt dangerous. So you stitched a version of yourself the world could applaud, a version that could blend in, get by, be liked, a version that looked like happiness, even when it was hollow. But beneath that carefully shaped image, you never stopped wondering, if they love who I pretend to be, will anyone ever love me? This is the invisible prison. Not made of bars or chains, but of expectations, of silence, of smiles that cost you pieces of your soul. You become fluent in small talk and shallow comfort. You know exactly what to say to keep the peace. You offer your energy to everyone but yourself. And the scariest part? You've gotten so good at performing, you almost forgot who you were before the stage. There's a mask we wear, not for deception, but protection. It's the smile that says, "I'm fine," when your heart is unraveling. It's the joke you make so they won't ask deeper questions. It's the nod of agreement when something inside you wants to scream, "No." You wear it at work, at family dinners, with friends who only know the version of you that's easy to love. And yet, there's a moment, late at night, when the world goes quiet, and so do you. And that's when you feel it, the ache, the pressure, the weight of being unknown. Because no matter how well you play the part, you can't outrun the truth of who you are. You're not just tired, you're tired of hiding. You're tired of shrinking. You're tired of smiling through pain just to make others comfortable. And maybe the real you isn't broken or too much or too sensitive. Maybe the real you is just buried, under years of adaptation, under layers of should and must and what will they think, under the belief that your truth was something to be ashamed of. But here's the paradox. The more you hide to be accepted, the lonelier you become, even when surrounded by love. Because love that's given to a mask can never reach the soul beneath it. So you live in between, seen but not known, smiling but not whole, alive but not free. And that in-between space is suffocating. It teaches you to smile not because you're happy, but because the silence behind the smile feels too loud to face. But there comes a moment, quietly, defiantly, when something in you refuses to pretend any longer. not out of anger, but exhaustion. And that moment is sacred, because it's the first crack in the mask. It's the first time you whisper, maybe I don't have to do this anymore. And through that crack, light begins to enter. Not the light of perfection, but the light of truth. So ask yourself gently, whose love are you performing for? Whose expectations are you still trying to meet? And what would happen, really, if you stopped pretending? Would the world fall apart? Or would you finally come together? The truth is, you are not meant to be a shape someone else designed. You are not here to be palatable. You are not here to be everyone's peacekeeper. You are here to be whole, to be seen, to be real. Even if your voice shakes, even if your truth is messy, even if the smile fades and all that's left is you, raw and unrehearsed. Because that's not a breakdown, that's a breakthrough. And maybe, just maybe, the version of you that never felt good enough was never the problem. The problem was the world that made you feel like your truth was too much. But your truth is not too much. Your truth is you. And the moment you stop smiling for survival is the moment you begin to breathe for real. Drop the smile for a moment and tell me, what have you been holding in for too long that no one ever really saw? Write it like it's the first time you're letting it out. This space is yours. There's a silence that doesn't feel peaceful. It's the silence of things unsaid, of feelings swallowed, of nights where the ache in your chest had no name, only weight. You've carried pain in ways no one saw, because it wasn't loud. It didn't scream, break, or bleed. It simply stayed. It sat with you at dinner tables where you laughed on cue. It followed you through crowded rooms where you felt utterly alone. It whispered to you in bed, just as your eyes began to close. This isn't who you are. But you endured, because pain taught you how to endure. It taught you how to tighten your jaw and keep going, how to build walls instead of asking for help, how to be strong by being silent. And slowly, without meaning to, you began to confuse survival with healing. You thought that moving on meant you were okay, but your body knew better. Your soul knew better, because pain doesn't disappear just because you ignore it. It waits, patiently, until you're still enough to hear what it's been trying to say. In the language of the heart, pain is not a punishment. It's a signal, a message, a mirror. It reflects all the moments you were not met, not heard, not held. It remembers what you tried to forget, the way your voice was once silenced by fear, the way you apologized for your tears, the way you pretended to be fine just to keep someone else comfortable. And maybe the deepest pain isn't even what happened, but the fact that no one saw how deeply it affected you. So you learned to be quiet, to minimize your wounds, to dress your bleeding in smiles and say, it's nothing, but it was something. It is something, and it's still living inside you. Not to haunt you, but to ask, when will you finally see me? Because healing doesn't begin when pain ends. It begins when pain is witnessed. The child in you who was ignored, the teenager in you who felt invisible, the adult in you who kept performing strength while falling apart inside. They're all still here, waiting to be seen, not fixed, not explained, just seen. There is a sacredness in honest pain, a kind of raw beauty in saying, I'm not okay, and letting that be enough. Buddhism teaches us not to run from suffering, but to turn toward it, to sit with it like an old friend, to ask it what it's been carrying for us all these years. Because pain is not the end. Pain is the doorway. It's the unraveling that makes space for something true. Maybe the parts of you that hurt the most are the same parts that love the deepest, feel the fullest, dream the loudest. And maybe you've never been broken, just overwhelmed and lonely in your truth. But you're not alone. Not here. Not now. There is nothing wrong with crying over something that happened years ago. Time doesn't heal what we bury alive. It only numbs. And numbness isn't peace. It's pause. So today, maybe just for a moment, you can stop being strong. You can put down the smile. Let the ache rise. Feel what you were never allowed to feel. Not because pain deserves to take over your life, but because you deserve to stop running. This is the gentle rebellion. To cry when the world expects you to laugh. To slow down when everything tells you to rush. To admit with tenderness, yes, that hurt me more than I let on. And in that softness, you meet yourself. Not the version of you they accepted, but the one who waited, quietly, faithfully, beneath the noise. And in that meeting, healing begins. There comes a moment, quiet, almost imperceptible, when the weight becomes too familiar to carry. Not because it grew heavier, but because you grew tired of pretending it was light. You reach for the mask, almost by instinct. But this time, your hand stops. You feel it. The tension in your face from all those practiced smiles. The stiffness in your chest from years of performing okay. And for the first time you wonder, what would it be like to let go? Not collapse, not give up. Just stop gripping so tightly. This is where detachment begins. Not as coldness, not as isolation, but as an act of soft rebellion. Letting go isn't apathy, it's honesty. It's realizing that holding on to the version of you that pleases everyone is suffocating the one that's actually alive. And when you dare to loosen that grip, something strange happens. You don't fall apart. You fall inward, into yourself. You begin to release the need to be understood by those who never tried. You stop rehearsing your feelings into digestible lines. You no longer seek applause for your endurance, because survival is not the same as living. Letting go feels like breathing for the first time in years. It's unclenching your soul. It's walking down the street with no performance left to give. It's speaking slower, softer, even if your voice trembles. Because detachment is not the absence of care. It's the presence of self. You're no longer bending to be chosen. You're choosing yourself by standing tall. Not louder, but truer. Not harder, but freer. The paradox begins to reveal itself. The less you strive to be accepted, the more you feel at peace. The less you explain yourself, the more you understand your own voice. The less you try to be lovable, the more love you actually feel. Because it starts to come from within. Buddhist wisdom speaks of release, not as a loss, but as a return. A returning to center, to stillness, to the you that was never missing, just buried beneath the noise of becoming. So let the leaves fall. Let the image crumble. Let the world misunderstand you. What you gain in return is something no applause could offer. Authenticity. That quiet, rooted knowing that you no longer owe anyone the version of you that made them comfortable. And yes, you will lose people. People who only knew how to love your mask. People who mistook your stillness for distance, your honesty for coldness, your peace for weakness. But you will also find yourself. And maybe for the first time you'll look in the mirror and see someone you actually recognize. Not flawless, not perfect, but real. And realness is a kind of liberation that no one can give you, and no one can take away. So breathe, unclench, stop performing strength. You were never meant to be a statue of resilience. You were meant to feel, to express, to soften. The self you tried to protect through control and approval doesn't need protection anymore. It needs permission to show up messy, to take up space, to stop smiling when the heart is grieving, to say no without guilt, to say yes without shrinking. This isn't detachment from the world. It's detachment from the need to be anything other than yourself. And from that space, a new kind of love arises. Not the kind that asks you to prove your worth, but the kind that meets you where you are. Gentle, present, whole. So if you're ready to loosen your grip, to stop becoming and start being, then maybe you've already begun. Because freedom doesn't always come with fanfare. Sometimes it sounds like silence. Sometimes it feels like relief. And sometimes it's just you, finally, breathing. There's a silence that doesn't scream. It heals. Not the silence of avoidance, not the silence you wore when no one listened, but the kind that arrives after the storm. It doesn't need to explain itself. It doesn't need to be profound. It just is. And maybe that's all you've been needing. Not answers, not promises, just the permission to stop fighting. Because for so long, you thought healing meant doing more fixing, more searching, more becoming. But what if healing is the opposite? What if it's found not in effort, but in presence, in sitting still? Not because you've given up, but because you finally understand. There's nothing wrong with you. There never was. The pain, the masks, the endless need to be enough. They were never the core. They were the costumes of a world that forgot how to sit with the raw. But you remember now. You remember what it feels like to exhale, to speak honestly, to not need the world's permission just to be. And in that stillness, you begin to trust life again. Not because it's fair, not because it always makes sense, but because you're no longer trying to control the waves. You're learning to float. This is surrender. Not the kind that gives in, but the kind that gives up the war. You're not at war with yourself anymore. Not trying to be stronger, softer, smarter, happier, just real. And from this honesty, compassion grows. You begin to look at your pain, not with judgment, but with gentleness, like an old friend you've stopped resenting, like a part of you that simply wanted to be understood. Even the scars, you no longer hide them. You trace them with your fingers, like a map of where you've been. Not with shame, but reverence, because now you see what they've shown you. Every crack let the light in. Buddhist teachings remind us, everything that rises falls, everything that appears disappears. And in this truth, we find peace, not in permanence, but in presence. You don't need to chase the next version of yourself. You don't need to earn your worth through struggle. You are not a problem to be solved. You are a story that's still unfolding. So sit. Let the silence hold you. Let the wind pass through the spaces you use to fill with noise. Let the tears come not as breakdown, but as baptism. Let the emptiness speak, and you might realize it was never empty at all. It was space, waiting for you, waiting for the moment you stopped resisting your truth. And now that you're here, now that you've let go, looked within, sat through the ache, you can begin again. Not as a new you, not as a better you, but as you, uncovered. There is no final line, no perfect ending, no sudden arrival at peace. There is only this moment, and in this moment, there is breath, there is stillness, there is you, no longer screaming to be heard, no longer smiling to survive, just here, and that might be enough. So ask yourself now, not with fear, not with urgency, but with softness. What if you don't need to become anything else? What if the next step isn't up or forward, but deeper? What if everything you've been running from was only trying to bring you back to yourself? And what if, right here in the quiet, you finally arrived?